You're probably wondering, how on earth did we end up with this epidemic of thyroid disease? How do we get into this mess? I have to warn you, you're about to discover some truths that may enrage you. When you see what's been done to our world and the effect that this carelessness has had on your body, this may just bring you to tears. Corruption, greed, and unchecked motives have led us into a world that is simply not safe for all of us who live in it. We're constantly bombarded by toxins, and there's no other way to be healthy today than to be informed of the lies that have been embedded into our minds. Whether it's the food you eat, the water you drink, or the products you put on your skin and face, you need to know the truth about what's in these products and the devastating impact they can have on your health and the health of your thyroid. Toxins can really play a paramount role in autoimmune disease, and especially thyroid disease. We know that the thyroid gland is designed to accumulate substances. This is to ensure that we get the proper amount of the building blocks required for making thyroid hormones. But sadly, in today's world, instead of nutrients, the thyroid accumulates toxins. Let's take a look at the toxins that we're exposed to.
We are living in an increasingly toxic world, and our bodies were not designed to handle all of this stress. So stress from a fast-paced lifestyle, toxins that we ingest in food substitutes, foods that are supposed to be food, but they're really just junk. I don't know, what is the average American comes into contact with over 80,000 chemicals? It's every day. Every day, on an everyday basis, So from the off-gassing of your car to your Glade plugins to your personal care products, and then the tremendous amount of stress. We know that we weren't built to handle this kind of stress. So autoimmune disease is an obvious consequence. In fact, the full spectrum of chronic inflammatory disease is a natural consequence of living out of sync with our nature.
Now, going beyond that, we're also seeing a lot of diagnoses of Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, and how does it get to an autoimmune condition? Now, autoimmunity, in my experience, is not an aberrant response by the immune system. It's an appropriate response to extraordinary circumstances. What are those circumstances? Very minerally deficient cells, if you will. Cells that are also, unfortunately, overwhelmed with toxicological burdens, heavy metals, mercury, etc. And these alter the integrity of those cells, the integrity of self, to the point where the immune system begins to look at those cells as foreign, not of self. And of course, Immunology 101 is self versus non-self. The immune system knows the difference. I don't believe that the immune system has gone awry and suddenly lost its mind and needs to be put in a straitjacket. I would perceive the ideal goal here would be to remove the interference, remove the toxins, give the body what it needs to restore integrity to self, to those cells, and thus cool the inflammatory response, the autoimmune response. But this can be a very daunting task for someone who's been dealing with this condition perhaps for years, sometimes even decades.
When you think of our physiology, the most sensitive tissues in our body are our glands.
Yeah, absolutely.
They are so sensitive. And what happens is, I believe these days we are living in a massively insensitive world.
Yeah.
We have created toxic chemistry, as you were saying, toxic cleaning products, toxic cars, toxic carpets, toxic furniture. You pick up a newspaper, you're
like cleaning stuff for your face has like plastic in it.
So, but we don't
It's crazy.
realize it. We don't realize that we're poisoning ourselves. And then these substances, there are literally thousands of endocrine disruptors, chemicals that we've identified that mimic hormones in the body that will break us down. And the only time we start to get it is when the body yells at us with a disease, and in this case with a thyroid condition. So I think, sensitivity, people often get beat up by their friends, family, etc. for being sensitive. And the position we take is that sensitivity, if you're sensitive to food, to chemicals, to this, to that, good for you, because that's a sign of intelligence. Your body is intelligent, your brain is intelligent, you're taking care of yourself, because we're living in a toxic world and we have to change that.
Your body wants to survive, and so it adapts to its environment. Autoimmune disease in Hashimoto's becomes the body's defense mechanism for overwhelming stressors and threats. Essentially, if the body believes that we're not in a safe place, it's going to want to slow us down. We know that in times of famine, in times of war, in times of high toxicity, it's really not beneficial for us to reproduce. And it's really not beneficial for us to be running around. And it's really not beneficial for us to have a lot of energy and be out into the world. It's a funny world we live in. Have you ever bought products with the hope that they would make your life better? Some of these products seem like just the miracle you've been hoping for. They make everything more efficient and so convenient. Life becomes easy, beautiful, and perfect, just like the commercials, right? I'm not sure that you're buying that story anymore. The truth is, some of these products that are marketed to make your life better can actually make you significantly worse by making you sick. The reality is that many products out there are full of toxins. What you're about to discover is that there are so many connections between diseases related to the thyroid and toxicity. So why do the toxins have such a profound effect on the thyroid?
So the interesting piece about the thyroid gland, as you know, is it's a kind of an environmental sensing gland, right? I mean, there are receptor sites in every single cell of the body for thyroid hormone, and it ramps up metabolism. So if something's going wrong in the human body, you don't want to ramp up metabolism. You don't want to use up your resources. So what normally will happen is you'll kind of shut down the thyroid gland in times of toxic stress, interestingly enough. So there's something called the cell danger response that happens when you're exposed to a chemical, or you're exposed to electromagnetic frequency, or you're exposed to radiation or anything. The cell will kind of say, hey, let's be conservative, you know? So the thyroid gland is one of the first things to respond to that. And what I find is there's that factor, and you know, heavy metals will accumulate there and radiation will accumulate there, and we don't really know, because it's so early, what other of the 87,000 plus chemicals we're using in our society right now might be accumulating or causing adverse effects in the thyroid gland. But let's take a step back and just say, isn't it interesting that thyroid disease has been skyrocketing in the last few decades? And it's not genetics, we know that. It's partially diet, but that's not the biggie. There's only one thing that I've seen in the literature, Isabella, that seems to correlate really nicely with that climb, with not just Hashimoto's, but all autoimmune diseases, and that's chemicals.
Well, you have to always take in consideration the genetics and the environment. Mm-hmm. And they're very interrelated. So certain environmental toxins, certain stressors might turn on certain genes. And that's how, you know, we're getting much deeper into what's causing different cancers. We don't have thyroid completely figured out with every single gene in the human genome, you know, for thyroid, but we're getting there. And so it's environmental pollutions, it's toxins. You are teaching people to get to the root cause using any way possible: their diet, their nutrition, their stress, the way they interact in the world, to look and see, do I have exposures to different toxins in my life? And you told me a wonderful story once about your own journey. And I was very moved, touched, and inspired by your own journey. You actually were a Chernobyl baby. Is that, I mean, I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, I was 3 years old when the Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred. And so I was living on the Ukrainian border at the time. And that's probably when my Hashimoto's started. I remember being anxious and cold as a 3-4-year-old child. And we know that the biggest implications of that nuclear fallout were thyroid cancer, as well as what they call benign thyroid disease, which is Hashimoto's Graves' disease. And so there was one village in particular that was really close to Chernobyl, and 80% of children within a certain age that were exposed had thyroid antibodies. And we know that a certain type of thyroid antibody, the thyroglobulin antibody, can be predictive of thyroid cancers.
With your particular interest in thyroid, I've always thought about the thyroid as being the sentinel organ. So for most people, if they have a thyroid problem, it's a sign, to me it's a sign, oh, we gotta go look at toxicity, you know, because part of what I have observed over the last 11 years with patients is that they'll start with one, and you know, when I'm doing their initial interviews, that they've started with one autoimmune disorder, and then the immune system is so out of kilter that they've then developed additional ones, but usually thyroid is the first autoimmune disorder for most people, although it can be lupus or rheumatoid arthritis or others, but the most common initial autoimmune disorder is thyroid from my experience. And so I think that thyroid is just, it's very sensitive to what is going into our bodies through our lungs and our skin and our food. And many people have little genetic glitches where they don't optimally have the environmental toxins just go through them. So it's like a barrel that's filling up because the little spigots aren't open enough to really let it through. So the best analogy that I explain to with patients is that it's just like you can have one person who's smoking for 60 years and they don't have any wrinkles and they don't have heart disease and they don't have lung disease. And then there's on the other extreme is the person who just had a little bit of secondhand smoke and then gets a lung cancer.
If you have thyroid disease, chances are that your family members may also be affected, especially if they're living in the same environment as you. Now, I don't just mean your human family members. The truth is, it's not just our species that's affected by toxins. Let's check in with licensed veterinarian Dr. Jean Dodds, who specializes in thyroid disorders in our four-legged family members.
The number of pets with autoimmune diseases, whether it be thyroid, the most common, or say diabetes in older cats, is 10 to 15 times what it used to be in the 70s. There's no question. And I think part of that is pollution, depletion of the ozone layer. It's the environmental effects. It's feeding foods that come from livestock that are fed on grasses that are treated with glyphosate, for example. The chemical that's used as a weed killer everywhere. I won't name the trade name, but I think everybody knows what it is. And so glyphosate is very, very dangerous because when they forage these crops, they're getting some of the toxins as well, even from the water runoff. And so there's a huge issue now about the exposure of humans and other animals to glyphosate and promotion of cancer. That just came out in the last 6 months. Some very good studies showing that all these things change the body chemistry, and that's probably part of the increasing frequency.
Numerous studies have found that the rates of thyroid disorders can be correlated to toxins in our environment. But many people suffering with thyroid disease are completely oblivious to the fact that the root cause of their conditions could be due to toxins. People may experience subtle signs and symptoms that they may be toxic, such as headaches, fatigue, storing more fat on their bodies, having a metallic taste in their mouth, or having multiple chemical sensitivities. Others may not have any obvious signs of toxicity. Let's look at what Wendy went through.
I wake up every morning now and I feel happy. I'm in a good mood. I don't have the anger and depression that I used to have when I had low thyroid function. I wake up with energy, which is a big change because it wasn't that way for many, many, many years. Many years leading up to my pregnancy and then several years after my pregnancy. I was tired and exhausted every morning when I woke up, and I would use coffee to stimulate myself and other things as well. Sugar, I was drawn to sugar and carbs naturally to try to stimulate myself and try to wake my brain up. But now I feel like I have natural energy in part because my thyroid's working well, and that feels really, really good. Well, when I finally learned that my problem wasn't willpower, it was really a huge relief because I can be very, very hard on myself, overachiever, perfectionist, and whatnot. And when I realized that I had control over my biology, and in my research I found out all the things that were controlling my biology, namely toxic metals interfering in my thyroid function, interfering in my energy production, interfering in my hormones. That was very empowering.
We can see that toxins can have a devastating effect on the thyroid. So what are some of these products in your daily life that are causing you to be toxic? The answer may shock you.
Chemicals like fire retardants, chemicals like BPA, that are on plastic products, chemicals like benzene and smoke. These are all potentially triggers. So there was a paper that we published in the Journal of Applied Toxicology several years ago, actually 2 years ago, where we took 400 healthy population samples and we wanted to see what happens. And what we found is that these chemicals that we get exposed to, they actually bind to our own proteins. So we checked in our study albumin being the most common protein. So these chemicals bind to albumin. So you have albumin in every major organ, every major tissue protein. And when they bind to that tissue protein, that albumin shifts its protein conformational change, and then now it becomes a foreign invader. So you could have BPA or benzene bind to albumin, and now this is a new target protein for attack. So the immune system thinks it's foreign. So if it's albumin, then the immune system starts attacking it. So when we look at chemicals, these chemicals come and bind to our own tissues. Now if it's adrenal albumin and you make antibodies against that, there's a potential for that to then cause autoimmunity. So what we've done is we've gone through the chemicals that people react to. We checked about 20 different chemicals that commonly people get exposed to. And now we're doing correlation research with which of those have correlations with people that have TPO and thyroglobulin antibodies. And we're finding there's a list of them. So some of that research is in publication. But for the most part, I can tell you, if you have Hashimoto's, we know that plastics, bisphenol A is a problem.
So BPA and plastics, is that the one?
Yeah, and BPA-free is worse.
BPA-free is even worse.
Yes, and that's something Dr. Vijnani taught me, and then now there's papers coming out on it.
And is that BPS that's contained in the BPA-free ones?
Yes. So they're actually more immune reactive, much more inflammatory. So it's just plastics in general.
So like just get glass everything?
Glass everything. So even my office, everything's glass, if you notice.
Yeah, I have.
Glass is a huge thing, but plastics, the key thing is it doesn't get exposed to heat, right? Because heating dissolves the plastic. So if you have a plastic bottle, if it's holding something acidic like orange juice or apple juice or vinegar, you're going to have high amounts of BPA in that product.
Okay, so it actually gets into the product.
Right.
So it's not just touching the plastic.
Right. So plastics are everywhere, but it depends on how much of it actually, leaches into your food, right? So if you heat it, it gets into your food. So people who microwave with even paper plates or things like that, they're coated with plastic. People that put a paper towel over their food, there's BPA all over that, so they get that all into their food. Or people who, heat up coffee cups or things and drink through a coffee lid, or even drinking through a coffee lid gets the heat that releases all the BPA. So heat releases BPA. So if it's going to be around involved with carrying your food and different food items. But if it gets heated, it's a problem. And also if it's carrying anything acidic, like ketchup in a plastic bottle.
Is coffee and tea, are they considered acidic? Because they could potentially leach off of our...
They're acidic, and now if you take an acidic solution like coffee and have a plastic lid and then sip through a plastic lid, you're loading yourself with BPA.
So that's something most Americans do every single day when they go to their coffee shop.
Yep. So we have lots of times we'll have patients and they have Hashimoto's or autoimmune diseases, and their morning ritual, their daily ritual, once or twice a day, they'll go and get a hot beverage and they'll drink through the lid.
Right.
And they're getting all this BPA exposure. And then we look at their labs and they have very high BPA bound to protein antibodies, so you can measure it. And then you go, wow, this is a trigger for your autoimmunity, right? So plastics being one of the most common ones.
If you think of some of the scariest villains that make you tremble in your seat while watching a movie, you'll notice that these characters will find joy in decimating cities, tearing apart loved ones, and they often set their target on women and children to show their vile and immoral nature. It's peculiar that toxins seem to behave in a similar way. They engulf entire populations, they're sneaky and they lie dormant and undetected, and they tear away things from people's lives. Thyroid disease affects almost 8 times the number of women in comparison to men. For various reasons, there exist vulnerabilities in women's bodies to thyroid disease, and the malicious toxin is always a glaring culprit. You see, our body wants to protect us, and our thyroid is trying to help us to survive. One potential reason why women may be more affected is that when our environmental sensors find that there is a high degree of toxicity around, they will create a situation within our bodies to reduce the likelihood of becoming pregnant. There are other reasons too that may have something to do with hormones.
If you're going to take in some in your skin in the way of some nice lotion or some sunscreen, or you're going to be using a toothpaste or deodorant or a shampoo or a hair gel, you're going to be inhaling some dryer sheets, the wonderful smells, or using perfume or aftershave on men. Anytime you're coming across anything that says fragrance, that says parfum, that says something along the lines of phthalate, P-H-T-H-A-L-A-T-E, then you have to know that you are increasing your estrogen content in your system. What I thought was fascinating, look at some of the studies coming out of northern Mexico, was as these women were applying more personal care products, the level of phthalates went up in their urine, meaning they had more in their body and they're peeing it out, right? And as their level of phthalates went up in their urine, their level of breast cancer increased. I mean, we know a lot of types of breast cancer are what's called estrogen positive, meaning the estrogen levels will feed the growth of the cancer. And what we saw was if they were postmenopausal, meaning they weren't producing much of their own estrogen, but they were getting a lot of these environmental estrogen in through their personal care products, then they had a 220% increase risk of breast cancer.
Wow.
Now, if they were premenopausal, meaning they still had their own estrogen being produced, and they had this environmental estrogen as well, then they had a 413% increased risk for breast cancer. So it just makes sense that we would have an increased risk of dis-ease if we're introducing toxic chemicals into our bodies.
One of the things that may really anger you is that some of the products that are marketed to make us better on the outside, by appealing to our inner vanity, are actually making us worse on the inside. The use of lipstick in particular has been connected with the development of lupus, another autoimmune condition. Absorption of toxins from the lips is more likely than from other cosmetics because the lips are a mucous membrane and because we may inadvertently ingest the products by licking our lips. As lipstick is often reapplied as well, we have a higher chance of getting exposed to these toxins over and over again every time we apply the lipstick. Cosmetics in general are especially problematic with regard to heavy metal contamination. A May 2001 report from the Environmental Defense of Canada tested a total of 49 pieces of makeup from 6 Canadian women for heavy metals and found some startling results. Among these toxins, arsenic, lead, nickel, beryllium, some of the amounts that would be banned if they were in food products. Skincare products are another source of toxicity. Most people don't realize that whatever they put on their bodies gets into their bodies. As a pharmacologist, I can tell you that these substances may even be more toxic when applied to the skin than they are when they're consumed internally. That's because absorption through the skin bypasses the liver, allowing for a higher potency and more chemicals to get into our bloodstream. Do we realize that we're putting chemicals and toxins directly into our bodies by applying these products?
The skincare manufacturers can make a lot of money off of skincare products, and I don't think anybody wants to hurt anybody. But I do honestly think that a lot of people think that they're safe. A lot of people aren't aware of the research. They haven't dug in and looked at what these chemicals can actually do in the body and the molecular structure of them and how they might impact our health. I don't think anybody wants to hurt anybody, but people want to make money. And so sometimes that means making products that last longer, so they have a longer shelf life. They don't have to throw them out. And that also means that they smell better, so people will keep using them. And there's a certain feel that people want when they use products. There's just the overall experience. Most manufacturers are more concerned about getting customers to keep using their products. What can they do to improve the customer experience and keep customers coming back? But they're not looking at the health implications of that. And that's what I do. As a doctor, that's what I was doing first, is concerned about my patient's health. And so when I created my skincare line, that's what I was looking for, is how can I still create those same kinds of effects that customers want, that enjoyable fragrance, that luxurious feel of products, that effect that they make us feel more beautiful and more confident. So I tell people, focus on your food and your personal care products when it comes to hormone disrupting chemicals, those toxins in our environment. Because I know that the personal care product industry talks about the fact that these products are safe. These ingredients are safe because of the small amounts. But if we're using them every single day, what's happening then? We're getting that constant exposure. Our bodies are never fully able to remove those parabens, phthalates, these other chemicals that we're getting exposed to on a daily basis. Our body doesn't get a break. Plus, we're getting pesticides in our food, we're getting pollution, air pollution, all these chemicals. What is happening in our bodies? We don't know. Those studies have not been done. And I don't want to wait until we get more information. I want to be proactive now, because we know things like parabens are xenoestrogens. And that means they have estrogenic activity in the body. They've been detected in breast tumor tissues. And so, you know, and I know that some skincare companies will say, well, that doesn't mean that they cause breast cancer. I'm like, no, that doesn't mean that. But the fact that the body takes them into our skin, into our bodies, and they're taken up into breast tumor tissue, that's not a good sign.
So people say to me, they say, hey, so what's the deal with my thyroid? And I say, well, clearly, obviously, it's connected with the central nervous system, but you know, there's something now where doctors didn't even have to look at the thyroid, and it's not that it didn't exist, but absolutely, there's a major toxicity concern when it comes to the thyroid, and you know, that's how I look at it. So if somebody comes in with a thyroid problem, I'm always concerned about a level of toxicity for sure.
When I see someone with any disease, especially autoimmune disease, I think to myself, what's causing it, right? I'm less interested in the name of the disease than what the cause is, whether it's colitis or psoriasis or Hashimoto's or whatever it is. What I'm more interested in is, how do we get to the root of why? It's the medicine of why instead of what disease, it's why is this happening. And when you look through the lens of functional medicine, you see there's really only 5 causes of all disease. And whatever is going on with somebody, those are the things I want to know about. And I become an expert in each of these areas. That's what a good functional medicine doctor does. They look at the role of toxins and microbes and allergens and stress and poor diet. Those all interfere with normal functioning. And they influence your gene expression, and they combine with your life experiences to create imbalances in the body. And depending on your unique genetics and your history and your problem, it will attack a different area. So in one person it could cause rheumatoid arthritis, another person it could cause Hashimoto's. Depends on you. That's what's unique about you. But the factors are the same. So my job is to be a detective and find out what kind of toxins are there. There are mercury and lead and pesticides. I mean, the average person, when they're born, has 287 known toxins in their umbilical cord blood before they take their first breath. Mercury, lead, arsenic, pesticides, DDT, phthalates, parabens, flame retardants, BPA, you name it. These chemicals are ubiquitous and they're affecting us. In fact, one of the sort of emerging concepts around autoimmune disease is this concept of autogens, these autoimmune-inducing toxins that are in our environment. And the thyroid is sort of like the yellow canary in the body. It's very sensitive, so it often is the first thing to get affected. And so I think there's good evidence that environmental toxins have a significant impact on thyroid dysfunction. So I really take a deep look in there and their story, what chemicals are they exposed to, what are they doing, and it could even be mold toxins, for example. So you can't always tell what they are.
Dr. Hyman just alluded to a potential toxic root cause that many are knowingly exposed to on a daily basis. This is something that can cause asthma, autoimmune disease, and a host of symptoms right under your nose. Mold. I've seen mold to be a trigger of thyroid disease in many people who don't get better with medications or changing their nutrition. Did you know that 45 million people may be affected by mold toxicity?
So it's been a long journey, and all the while I thought, well, it's Hashimoto's or it's something dealing with my thyroid, whereas in actuality I think the mold exposures over the years have built up the toxins, which then create all sorts of other problems within the body, create the autoimmunity to happen and the leaky gut to happen, and therefore, voila, I have Hashimoto's. So I finally found a good doctor to deal with me for Hashimoto's, and that's not easy, as you know. It has to be somebody who really understands the functional medicine perspective and can help work with the whole body. And finally, once my systems weren't really responding the way they should, then we started looking at mold as a possibility. Because what often happens is that you're on supplementation, you're on medications, and yet your body doesn't respond.
The two biggest ones are mold and glyphosate, also known as Roundup. And both of those have a profound effect on damaging the tight junctions, the little trapdoors between the cells that line the gut. So in those cases of either mold exposure in a genetically susceptible individual, or of Roundup, which sadly is everywhere in our food and our land, and they just recently did a study on organic wines from California. It was 80% of them had detectable residues of glyphosate.
Oh no.
I know, right? So sad. It's everywhere. It's pervasive. I always say we're swimming in toxic soup. So we all need to learn daily methods of detoxifying. And again, mold exposure, people have no idea, oh, there's little black mold in my condo, in my apartment. And for some people, genetically, there's about 75% of the population that isn't affected. So they might have a sniffle or a congestion, but they're not like immune or systemically affected. The 25% of the population, though, that is, they can have profound inflammatory immune responses, and there's a certain metabolite called TGF-beta that can totally trigger the autoimmune cascade, and that is directly related to mold exposure. So there's a whole subpopulation of Crohn's and colitis and MS that are toxin exposure, so gut and toxin. And like I said, glyphosate or mold tend to be the two worst, and they have a really bad effect on the permeability of the gut, causing leaky gut. So in my book, if I'm treating a patient with mold exposure, we really can't heal their gut. We can give them herbs, we can give them probiotics, all that stuff. If they continue to have mold exposure and they're genetically susceptible, they won't get well. They won't get well.
Most people have been mold exposed at one time or another. You go into a house, you see mildew on a shower curtain or on a windowsill, and that is an exposure. But I would also say that about 75% of the population has an immune system that they can handle that, so that they can go ahead and process it, the immune system recognizes it, and can deal with the situation. But there's still another about 25% of the population that cannot deal with that. The immune system doesn't recognize the issue that's there.
And what happens in that situation?
The mold can go and emit some toxins and what's called VOCs, and those are volatile organic compounds and fragments. And those toxins can get into the body. We inhale them, it can go through the skin, it can go through mucous membranes, and they stay in the body. And the immune system says, okay, we know something's there, but we don't know what it is, and so it can't mount the immune defense against them. So they stay in the body and they build up over time. And so when you have a buildup up to a certain level, then it starts impacting the systems within the body. And it impacts almost all the systems, just like Hashimoto's does.
I decided that I was going to do fewer of the things that make me weak and more of the things that make me strong, which sounds kind of radical, except there are so many little things. It's kind of like a death by 1,000 cuts. It's not just one thing you can blame. But when I really zoomed in on what was affecting me, I knew that I lived in several houses with toxic mold. And I also found research that said that toxic mold directly triggers autoimmunity to the thyroid and actually to parts of the adrenals, as well as to parts of the hypothalamus, parts of the brain. So these are all involved in what happens when your thyroid isn't working very well. And I said, all right, I'm going to aggressively remove food from my diet. And I developed a diet that reduced all of the things that trigger autoimmunity, including foods that are likely moldy, and I quit exposing myself to moldy environments. And when I did that, my thyroid function improved.
Wow, wow. Hey, you've done some really impressive things, and one of the foundational things was changing your diet around, and that's how you came up with the concept for the Bulletproof Diet, was on your own, from your own health journey. So what are some of the foods that can contain mold?
It turns out that some of these foods, like nuts that are paleo, are very contaminated, or things like peanuts are well known for having aflatoxin, but it goes deeper than that. Coffee is a major problem, chocolate is a major problem, beer is a major problem. In fact, anything made out of grain, whether or not it contains gluten, is a very high likelihood of having these mold toxins. And what we're learning is that different people respond differently to different mold toxins. And the scary thing is that if you have 3 different mold toxins, they amplify each other. So just because you have allegedly safe limits of one doesn't mean that you're actually safe, especially if you tend to have autoimmunity. So whenever I see someone reading the Bulletproof blog who says, I have thyroid problems, I say, well, number 1, talk to Isabella. But number 2, have you considered whether the environment around you has mold in it? And have you considered whether some foods you eat do this? And there's a hint from these foods. If you eat a food and after that meal, your eyes are running, you're coughing, that's a pretty good sign something wasn't right. But what's more nefarious is that you have this 2 hours later, this weird, like, I'm really tired, or just a really strong craving for dessert at the end of the meal, or a couple hours after the meal.
So now that we can see the connection between thyroid disease and mold, let's look at some ways to overcome mold toxicity. You can recover your health from mold toxicity, but not many know the path. Here are some real answers based on solid science and practical solutions. So, first step of healing from mold toxicity is either leaving the toxic place completely, which can be very, very challenging for people who are, on a limited budget, or, own a place or in a lease. So that's definitely a really important thing. If we can, we should remediate it, but in some cases you have to completely abandon your residence.
It depends on how sick you are. If you're really, really sick and having neurological symptoms, it is, but I prefer that people actually try to be someplace else for a period of time until they can see they're starting to get better, and then deal with their residences if possible. The next step is to at least get the base nutrients. So I find that most people are nutritionally depleted, so there's some, things like magnesium and B vitamins and those just basic things that, especially when your body's been challenged by a toxic environment, you need to replete. And then the gut, which for me is the center of the universe.
Yes.
So methylation is one of the ways that we clear things out of our body and to do repair. And a lot of us have little methylation defects where our bodies need a special form of folic acid or higher amounts of B6 or trimethylglycine and other nutrients to help our little pathways in our cells to work properly. So I found that a lot of times the people that are a little slower in getting better, that when we address methylation, it'll give them a jump start in healing. So that's been a really important piece of learning about what needs to happen for people to recover, not just from mold toxicity, but a lot of people with autoimmune issues. One of the important pieces of getting well for most people is to find some things that help to open up the spigots and help them to detoxify better. So, some practitioners do use cholestyramine, which is a medication that has to be prescribed. I prefer to use some of the natural things like bentonite clay and pectazole, which is a citrus pectin, activated charcoal. And those are things that you can get through very good supplement companies, not just at the drugstore.
Now, there are certain toxins we might be consuming because we've been told that they're good for us. One of these is fluoride. Fluoride has been added to our toothpaste as well as to our water supplies to help combat tooth decay. Yet studies from around the world have found that its value in helping tooth decay has been greatly exaggerated, and that in fact our nutrition is key to healthy teeth. What's even worse is that fluoride can suppress thyroid function and potentially trigger autoimmune thyroid disease. A 2015 British study reported that medical practices in areas that had fluoridated water were twice as likely to report hypothyroidism in their patients. Additionally, the rates of hypothyroidism were statistically matched to the rates of fluoride in the water supply. If you're drinking tap water in a fluoridated area, there's a chance you're getting enough fluoride to suppress your thyroid function.
It's really important just to not only learn about toxic chemicals and how they might affect your body, and then systematically try to reduce your exposure to as many as possible. And I think the number one way is to filter your drinking water, just to get the chlorine and fluoride out of your drinking water. I mean, especially for thyroid health.
The problem with toxins like fluoride and chlorine is that we're showering in them every single day. In the United States, these chemicals are added to our municipal water sources to kill bacteria. Fluoride is added on the presumption that it reduces cavities. I don't personally believe that, but it's in our water supply nevertheless. So people really need to think about, getting a whole house water filter or getting a shower filter to reduce the amount of chemicals that they're absorbing every day, either in their shower water or in their drinking water. because these toxins, I think because they are so prevalent in our water source, are a big cause of thyroid dysfunction.
You can't eliminate the toxins quickly enough through urine and respiration and sweating. And a lot of people don't even sweat anyway. They live indoors, they live in air conditioning. They don't even have exposure to nature anymore. And you're not getting enough clean water into your body because the water supply is so contaminated with heavy metals and more chlorine that is in municipal water supply systems and more fluoride. In other words, the very things that people are supposed to be doing to detox their bodies, like drinking clean water, turn out to be the vectors of recontamination in our modern society. Water is a powerful solvent. It dissolves most chemicals and most toxins. Water is supposed to grab onto these things, put them into solution, and allow your kidneys to get them out of your system where you expel them. But instead, the water supply today is a source vector of the recontamination of your body, so that your body never really has a chance to properly clean itself. And this brings you to the obvious conclusion that if you want to have a healthy thyroid, you better start drinking clean water.
I mean, in the case of fluoridated water is probably the most disturbing because of all of the things that are being done theoretically on our behalf, right? It's a violation of the medical ethical principle of informed consent to put a drug into someone's body without, consenting. And that's the justification, is that fluoride is somehow going to, through drinking water, impart a dental benefit. But the real problem as it connects to thyroid disease is that fluoride is also a chemical that we just have no use for biologically. So our body has to expend great resources to eliminate it. And one of the ways that it does that is it uses glutathione enzymes, which are produced through selenium, which is something that you don't see anymore in the soil because factory produced and agricultural, produced food is conventionally, there's no need for selenium, like it's not in the soil. So we're already deficient in it. We can't detoxify this fluoride out of our body effectively. And what ultimately can happen is, of course, the thyroid crashes. Both in hyper and hypothyroid states, selenium deficiency is implicated, and it's also corrective in both hyper and hypo. That's the one signal in the biomedical literature on the topic that has come back over and over again for me.
We're moving in the right direction. I think we're spreading the awareness. A lot of the thyroid concerns, and I hate to say this, actually came from good intentions and good interventions, like public health wanting us to have fewer cavities. So they started adding fluoride to the water supply, and they wanted us to have fewer goiters, so they started adding iodine to our salt supply. But then we ended up having higher rates of Hashimoto's because the whole body is out of balance. And so I think the point is, you can't just give one little thing and expect the body to heal.
Yes.
You have to really take a holistic approach. And so looking at all of the different root causes in our environment, the lifestyle things that we're doing. And we know that, iodizing our salt hasn't reduced the rates of thyroid disease as a whole. So it's kind of changed and shifted the way that thyroid disease is now expressing, because we have an underlying problem within our environment and our system. You've uncovered a lot of different potential toxins that and triggers that can lead to our disease epidemic and thyroid disease. Can you share some of those?
Yeah, it's a really convoluted, sort of labyrinthine discussion, because when you really look at the increased prevalence of thyroid cancers, we have, for example, a signal in even Western populations that post-Fukushima, the release suddenly of massive doses of radioiodine 131, along with hundreds of other anthropogenic radionuclides, may have led to a subsequent increase in thyroid cancer diagnoses. So when it comes to the role of toxicants in the epidemic, so to speak, of endocrine malignancies, thyroid cancer being number one right now as far as an endocrine malignancy, we have things as simple and as omnipresent as perchlorate, which not enough know about yet, because it's a part of, unfortunately, a cover-up of the military-industrial establishment having really contaminated the environment, and a lot of our foods now contain it, with rocket fuel, and it's a munitions ingredient. It's also in fireworks. But it's a profound disruptor of the thyroid, and there's so many other ones that indirectly or directly have now been found to interfere, like bromides, things that were used even in certain sodas were just sort of kind of making our thyroid not work. So in the context of the burgeoning exposure to novel toxicants, which is a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution, basically started in the 1880s, but now we're getting almost in the post-industrial revolution, hundreds of thousands of chemicals in our environment. It's a miracle to me, Isabella, that we're holding together so well.
Well, avoid the thyroid bombs, things like cigarettes, swimming pools. I know that sounds crazy, but the chlorine in the pool will compete with the iodine in your thyroid gland, and the chlorine is a bully, it's gonna win. So that will suppress your ability to make thyroid hormone. Plastic water bottles are a bomb, that's why we're in glass. Cheers. Cheers. Cigarettes, another thyroid bomb. Fluorinated drugs that could...
Like fluoroquinolones.
Yeah.
What are some of the names that people may have heard of?
Ciprofloxacin, levofloxacin. These go by Cipro, Levaquin, Noroxen. There's a few others, but these have a fluoride backbone. Flonase is another one. It's an intranasal spray, and there are ear drops and eye drops. So these contain fluoride, and that can not only affect your melatonin levels in your pineal gland, but it can also compete with iodine at the level of the thyroid gland, which is like a sponge. It's trying to suck up that iodine, and in the presence of these bullies like fluoride and chlorine from the pool, those bullies win, and they prevent us from making adequate amounts of thyroid hormone. And drive an old car. I know that's kind of funny, but these new cars give off-gassing of bromine, and that can be harmful to the thyroid gland. And I actually had a friend who bought a new car, and within 2 months, she was thyroid sick.
Wow.
Yeah, so she had to go through all the treatment with that. So those are the most important tips. Obviously, avoid the problems that are going to and the foods and the drinks and things that are going to keep you sick.
So let's dispel some additional myths about things we're led to believe are good for us but may actually be harming us. Many people know that iodine is an important component of thyroid hormones, and not having enough iodine can actually cause hypothyroidism. One might assume that every person with thyroid disease would greatly benefit from iodine. And so iodine was added to the salt supply of many developed nations, including the US, most of Europe, and Australia by public health officials to address the iodine deficiency hypothyroidism. The more the better is what most people think. But when it comes to certain nutrients, this isn't always the case. Many people may be led to believe that they need to take high doses of this nutrient to overcome thyroid disease, but this may actually be detrimental for people with autoimmune thyroid conditions. Today, there are doctors who have spoken out to say that it can also have a devastating effect on the body. There's a strong voice suggesting that iodine is something we may need to be cautious about. What's the truth?
Iodine is a controversial supplement nutrition. We do need iodine for the thyroid hormone thyroid gland to make thyroid hormone. So when we eat, we require iodine. We also require the amino acid tyrosine. Those are the two building blocks for the thyroid gland to make thyroid hormones. The problem that I see, it's preached out there that if you give iodine high doses, 50 milligrams of iodine a day, it fixes everything. I am not a believer in that because I've seen people that actually got harmed with taking that amount of iodine. The thing is that if you have a positive thyroid peroxidase antibody, it's really important, this is really important point, is that if you have Hashimoto's with a positive thyroid peroxidase antibody and you take iodine, it's like putting gasoline on a fire. You're going to destroy your thyroid faster. What happens is the thyroid peroxidase attaches iodine to make, in your thyroid gland, to make thyroid hormone. And if you have a positive thyroid antibody and you put more iodine, you're activating that enzyme to go faster, and you're going to just, and the positive antibodies will just eat that up. So the problem is that it's not, it's all over. Like if a patient goes to a health food store and they say, hey, I have a thyroid condition, they'll say, take iodine, without even knowing the thyroid peroxidase antibodies. So the thing is that I'm just one person, I have a small little practice, but the thing is, you have to be very careful. Know your thyroid peroxidase antibody, and if you have that condition, I recommend a very minimal dose of iodine, probably like 1 or 2 milligrams at the most, but high doses at 12 milligrams, up to like 50 milligrams, I think that's going to that'll make your thyroid condition worse.
Some people will say that iodine is like kryptonite to the thyroid gland, and others will say that you absolutely need it to heal. What do you say to that?
Right, both. Yeah, it's a very controversial issue, and it gets pretty heated, the debate actually, and you know, some proponents of iodine recommend up to 50 milligrams a day or even more in some cases, and that's remarkable when you consider that the upper limit for iodine on a daily basis is considered to be 1.1 milligrams. So that's 50 times the upper end of the limit. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have some people who say that nobody should be taking supplemental iodine, especially not people with Hashimoto's disease. The controversy exists because there are some studies that suggest that populations with higher iodine intake have higher levels, higher incidence of Hashimoto's disease. And that if you look at countries when they first add iodine to salt, then you see an uptick in the diagnosis of Hashimoto's. But more recent studies that actually also looked at selenium status in those populations found that increase in Hashimoto's tends to only happen in populations that are also concurrently selenium deficient. And if selenium status is adequate, then you don't see that triggering of Hashimoto's. And in animal studies where mice have goiter due to iodine deficiency, and they give them iodine, if they give them selenium along with the iodine, they don't develop any autoimmune problems. Whereas if they give them iodine alone without selenium and they're selenium deficient, they will develop autoimmunity. So it seems that selenium plays an important role in this story and is not often discussed. There are still some studies that suggest that even if selenium status is adequate, that higher doses of iodine may be problematic for people with Hashimoto's, and it can decrease the activity of thyroid peroxidase, which is necessary for adequate thyroid function, and may trigger or exacerbate the autoimmune problem. So I think, as is often the case, it really boils down to individual patients, because on the other end of the spectrum, the average iodine intake in the US has declined by 50% since the 1970s. So that's a pretty substantial decrease. And up to 35% of women of childbearing age or pregnant women are deficient. So that's 1 in 3 women. And iodine is an absolutely crucial nutrient for pregnancy and for the developing fetus. Iodine deficiency is associated with cretinism and low IQ and improper development of the brain and the thyroid gland if a pregnant woman is iodine deficient. So it's really, really important, and yet less than 20% of pregnant women are taking prenatal vitamins that contain iodine. Most prenatals don't contain iodine. And then we have other populations that are at higher risk of deficiency, like vegans in particular, and also perhaps surprisingly, people on a paleo type of diet, because the biggest sources of dietary iodine are dairy products, some breads, and sea vegetables, and then of course iodized salt. So if you take someone who's on a healthy diet, they often will replace iodized salt with sea salt, and there are reasons for that. Sea salt has trace minerals and is generally a healthier choice, but you've just removed one of the biggest sources of iodine in the diet.
Let's take a look at mercury toxicity. Did you know that if you have dental amalgam fillings, also known as silver fillings, you actually have mercury in your mouth? In fact, amalgam contains 50% mercury by weight, and post-mortem studies have found that this mercury does accumulate in thyroid tissue. It can also get into our brain, our pituitary gland, and our kidneys. Carrie's story shows how mercury from amalgam fillings can trigger thyroid disease.
Yeah, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's disease, and the symptoms that first started, I started getting really bad acne on my face, and then it progressed to hives, and I had hives from the neck up, and it covered my entire face, and my face was not only swollen with the hives, but I was also bright red, and it itched, and it actually felt like someone was holding a frying pan to my face all the time. I was burning all the time. I also became allergic to everything. If I ate lettuce, I would break out into hives. If I ate meat, I would break out into hives. If I touched plastic, if I smelled perfume, my body was literally just kind of going crazy. And I also became allergic to tap water. I figured that out one morning. I woke up and I was really trying to figure out at the time, like, what am I reacting to? What's going on? Because I didn't have any answers. And I woke up and I splashed water at my face, and I immediately broke out into hives and discovered that, you know, the contaminants in the tap water were also affecting me. I couldn't even be around the steam. Like if somebody was doing dishes in the kitchen and there was steam coming up from the hot water, I couldn't be in the same room. So my hair was falling out. I was becoming depressed. I couldn't sleep. It was pretty horrible. So it was a lot of symptoms, and my body was just basically breaking down. I went in for a filling removal replacement. The dentist had said that there was a cracked filling in one of my molars, and it was a big filling. I remember that filling, it literally filled up like almost the whole molar. And so I went in to get that removed, and it was an amalgam filling. A lot of people know those as a silver filling. I didn't know at the time that those silver fillings are 50% mercury, and then there's other heavy metals in there. And then also when you get one removed, you need to go to a dentist who is properly trained, who's going to take the right precautions. And so I went to the dentist, and he did not take really any precautions, and it was a 3-hour appointment. And I lay there as he just drilled and drilled and drilled, and I breathed in most of the vapors. And as soon as I sat up from the dentist chair, I was sick. And I went, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me. And I remember stumbling out of the dentist's office, and my husband came and picked me up. And then I was in bed for a full week. I had no energy. And I remember my husband and I sitting and talking and thinking, why would I take a filling so bad? Like, this is really weird. I was fine. And so after about a week, I regained some of my energy and went on my way, and then that's when all of the symptoms started, right? I started getting the acne, and then the hives, and I became allergic to everything and all of that stuff.
Even if they have fillings made with some chemicals, now they have a lot of different materials to fill these cavities. Still, it is artificial stuff, and many people are sensitive to these chemicals. But if it's amalgam actually is 55% of mercury, a little bit of copper, and just a little bit of silver. I think about 30% of silver, although they say it is silver.
They call them silver fillings.
Yes, yeah. But copper is dangerous if it goes in a high amount, although it's a nutrient. And imbalance in zinc and copper could cause a lot of problems, even in behavior and emotion health. And of course, mercury is very, very toxic. They say that it should be seated in somewhere, deep in the teeth, but actually with every chewing, with every hot beverage that we have, the part of the mercury goes through the gum. We swallow it and goes to our system, we absorb it, and then it goes through the intestinal wall, and then in a pregnant woman, it could go through the placenta to the fetus. and that could cause problems. And there are a lot of publications now that actually have shown that a kid from the mom who has a lot of amalgams in mouth could have autism and other problems. But the thyroid gland is very sensitive. It is sensitive to all kinds of toxins. And of course, mercury is the most toxic element on the world, but of course it could cause a lot of damage for the thyroid, especially in a little kid and in adults as well. And it promotes, of course, an inflammation, antibody production, slow function, everything, because it's a toxic element. It's a very toxic, most toxic element on Earth. And that's why, you know, everything begins in the mouth.
So thyroid is the canary in the coal mine. It's very sensitive to toxins. The thyroid itself, also we have to remind ourselves what drove that, what drives the thyroid. It's the pituitary. You know, so people with silver amalgam fillings, by the way, that's how I lost my life. You know, they vaporize mercury right into the brain, and what studies show in particular, it goes right up into the hypothalamus pituitary, the very part of our brain that drives and controls the thyroid and the adrenals. And in my own story, you know, I thought that, hey, I was sick, I was fatigued, I had thyroid issues, and I tried to address my thyroid and my adrenals many times. But really what the problem was is I had mercury deep in my hypothalamus pituitary. And so trying to address my adrenals and thyroid, it actually would make certain things better, but certain things worse. But it wasn't until I really went upstream, removed the mercury, that my adrenals and my thyroid actually started working again. But I had to go upstream, remove the interference, then the body can do the healing. I mean, that philosophy is what did give me my life back ultimately.
If you are someone with thyroid disease and amalgam fillings, I encourage you to take the ELISA test. This test can be obtained from a biological dentist and can help you determine if you are reacting to the mercury in your mouth. It's important to know that amalgam fillings can trigger autoimmune disease, not just when they're in your mouth, but removal of these fillings can also trigger autoimmune disease. If you determine that you need to have your amalgams removed, it's important to have it done safely. If the removal is not done properly, the removal process can actually cause you to breathe in additional mercury vapor. Instead of a low dose of mercury over time, you'll get this big, huge megadose of mercury all at once. Most conventional dentists do not remove amalgam fillings properly, so I encourage you to work with a biological dentist and ensure that you're properly protected with a rubber dam, an oxygen mask, a skin cover, extra suction, and targeted supplements to help bind up the mercury residues. Dental amalgams are a significant source of mercury, but even people who have never had silver fillings may become mercury toxic. Other sources include contaminated fish like tuna, coal plants, and even some interventions we may deem as healthful.
One of the problems is that many people say, my animal, my dog, became thyroid deficient after a vaccination, so therefore the vaccine caused it. That's really not the case, except for rabies vaccine. And what happens is the vaccinations are in a fertile ground of genetic susceptibility for an imbalance in the immune system. And so you're just exposing the fact that this animal is going to be more susceptible to vaccines, more susceptible to toxins, more susceptible to environmental pollution, more susceptible to having an endocrine dysfunction. And that's why they coincide often. Rabies vaccine is different. There are published data from Purdue University that showed that when you give rabies vaccine to dogs, within 60 days after that, they can have an increase in autoantibodies against the thyroid. Rabies vaccine is required by law, so we don't have much choice about that. It's a very difficult dilemma. But only one of the available veterinary rabies vaccines does not contain thimerosal, which is the mercury salt that's been associated with autoimmune diseases in people. We see exactly the same thing. So we tell people, when you have to get a rabies vaccination, make sure that A, the animal is healthy. The label says for healthy animals only. And even though the law requires it, you don't give it to an unhealthy animal, you defer it till the animal's better. Number one. And number two, only give one without mercury. So that's at least one of our ways of trying to prevent the occurrence of diseases associated with vaccinosis.
We've now talked about how toxins can be devastating to the body, especially through the effect on the thyroid. You may have heard that the best way to get rid of toxins is by detoxing. But is this really good for people with thyroid disease? So that's like one of the things that people often talk about, like everybody needs to detox and detox is good. And I think for a healthy person, when you're like super healthy and you want to do a detox, those things might be okay for you. They might make you feel better. But for people with Hashimoto's, for people with autoimmune disease, you can actually get yourself in trouble with like the forced detoxes.
Yeah, so I think the way I've been looking at it as a clinician is you have to have enough health to be able to do a detox. So many times when people have adverse reactions to a detox, they just blame it on a toxic reaction, but it's not always a toxic reaction, it's actually an immunological reaction. So there's a concept called chemical tolerance. So how well does your immune system tolerate chemicals and whether you're reactive to chemicals or not, right? So we'll have sometimes many patients that suffer from an autoimmune disease, and we'll do, let's say, Cyrex panel, look at their chemical reactivity, and they're reactive to most chemicals, which means they've lost their chemical tolerance. Now, if those people do chelation or do a heavy detox, they will absolutely make themselves worse.
Because they move stuff around. Because the chemicals just sit there and they're causing trouble, but they're not causing as much trouble if they were awake and moving around and getting into other tissues. Is that kind of my...
Exactly. So, you know, the model of just looking at levels and then trying to clear them out can be very dangerous. So I think a deeper level is look at their chemical tolerance to see if they have chemical immune reactivity, and then look at clinical strategies to improve their chemical tolerance, right?
Yeah, so looking at making sure the one is that you're reactive to the metals, not whether you have them or not, because in the end, we're all going to be exposed to some sort of metals. And then I think moving them out of our environment is important rather than trying to move them forcefully out of our bodies.
Exactly. So I think a better approach would be to look to see if someone has chemical immune reactivity, and if that doesn't exist and that's okay, then you would consider things like clearing compounds out. But if you try to clear compounds out and you've lost your chemical tolerance and you react to the chemicals, and as you try to pull these from the tissue, you can absolutely make patients worse.
What do you do in your clinic for people with toxins?
First off is quantify. So we do measurements and urine tests, blood tests. There's ways that can really show what the person's exposed to in the short term and what may have built up over the long term. And some people, the analogy I make is like your Teflon or your Velcro. To be precise, you don't really want Teflon because that's toxic, but some people, things don't stick to them. They can be exposed, they may have had, you know, dental amalgams or whatnot, but they really never build up mercury by luck of the draw. And some of those things we can predict, some we can't, but a lot of those that have thyroid disease, they're Velcro. So every speck of anything they were around, a lot of it may be harbored inside of them. So we want to know what that is so we can know when we've gotten it out, when we've made a positive change. And then we think about diet therapy, supplements, things that affect digestion, intravenous therapies, and then really documenting what their burden was before and after. And like, hey, now you're clean.
Since we have to be careful with forceful detoxing, I'd like to share some gentler approaches to getting rid of toxins. Ones that you can do in your very own home. In some cases, just doing the things recommended in this next section can help you get rid of toxins to the degree that you may not even need additional therapies.
Since the most common cause of thyroid dysfunction is mercury, you can take supplements that remove mercury from your body. And the best substance you can take is cilantro oil. It's completely natural. This is not about eating cilantro. You can't quite get enough of those beneficial compounds to detox mercury just from eating cilantro, but it's a start. What I like is cilantro oil that's pressed from the cilantro seeds, and that oil really gets into your brain. The brain readily accepts it and really pulls mercury out of your brain and out of your body as well. There's also cilantro extracts, and those are fine as well. They work very, very well in the clinical research to remove mercury from your body. But I take about 1 teaspoon per day of the cilantro oil. Very, very effective detox, and it works very much the same way as DMSA. which is a prescription synthetic sulfur that removes mercury from your body. And some people are so toxic in mercury that they do need the DMSA, but only testing can determine that. Not everyone is a candidate for DMSA or needs to take it. If you're mildly toxic in mercury, you can just do the cilantro oil. Other things that are really effective are Pectosol C. This is a modified citrus pectin, and it's made from citrus peels. It's totally natural. I take about 5 to 10 grams of that per day, and that is amazing at absorbing so many different metals and chemicals, including mercury. And that's what I take as a binder when I'm detoxing or you're doing infrared sauna. You take this substance and it just absorbs all these toxins that you have in your body. It's amazing. The next thing I recommend people take is selenium. Most people are deficient in selenium. You need selenium for your thyroid hormones to convert properly from T4 to T3. You also need selenium to detox mercury from your body, to push mercury out of your body. So definitely recommend 200 to 400 micrograms of that per day. And then there is sodium R-lipoic acid. That is very, very effective at detoxing mercury. This is a very different substance from alpha lipoic acid. I can only recommend Life Extension Super R-lipoic acid. This is a fat soluble, it's the only fat soluble sodium R-lipoic acid on the market, and that is 20 to 30 times more effective than alpha lipoic acid. So a completely different animal. So these are the top 4 supplements that I would recommend to detox mercury so that you can do that safely at home and just get started before you do any kind of testing. These are the top 4 guys that are going to get your mercury.
One of the things I recommend for people struggling with thyroid disease is to clean up their home and personal care routine. Get rid of the antibacterial soaps with thyroid-disrupting triclosan. Let go of your lead-laced lipsticks and ditch the potions and lotions that are full of hormone-disrupting chemicals. The choice is yours. You can go on a 2-week detox of all conventional personal care products, or you can make a choice to select products that are made with real organic ingredients.
You also need to worry about, some of the chemicals that are in cosmetics. You need to use much cleaner cosmetic products. If you're a woman, you're using a lot of cosmetics. But also, you need to eat clean. You really need to eat whole, fresh foods, preferably organic foods. You need to try to stay away from those pesticides and herbicides. You need to be cognizant about flame retardants because they are really known as thyroid sabotage agents. So flame retardants are embedded into clothing, into upholstery and furniture, drapery, carpeting, all of those kind of textile materials. So there are materials that are cleaner than others, but if you're not able to get those, then you need to be very proactive about sort of airing out that initial off-gassing of new products when you have them, and you can, that new carpet smell, new car smell, new drapery smell, that's not a good thing. Those are toxic chemicals off-gassing that can be deleterious to your health.
On December 1961, I had a couple of years left in veterinary school, and I was alone doing service projects for the pathology department, doing autopsies on animals and people, and I ran into the first mass die-off in America from pollution. Interestingly enough, it had to do with the pollution of a common fertilizer, nitrate fertilizer, which over a period of 6 months had caused 500 lambs to get goiter. Chronic nitrate intoxication through their water as runoff from fertilizer from adjacent farms caused them to have Hashimoto's disease. They had hypothyroidism, they had large goiters, very obvious goiters. And when I began to open them up at autopsy, a farmer dropped 50 of these dead lambs on me, and he said that he had 500 die in one night. And I figured, why did 500 die in one night? Because when you have thyroid problems in a population of humans or animals, you might get 1 die today, and 2 years later 1 will die. 500 don't die in one night. Well, as I began to cut these bodies of these sheep open, as the blood would come out onto the wool, instead of looking like blood, it looked like chocolate milk, which is called methemoglobin. I knew immediately that it was caused by nitrate poisoning. And so still, why did they all die in one night? Well, they all had goiter, all had Hashimoto's goiter, And why did they all die in one night? I kept asking myself. Well, I figured, oh, well, your thyroid gland controls your metabolism, keeps your body at a certain temperature. Okay, it was December. And in Missouri, the University of Missouri, in Columbia, Missouri, it was not unusual for the weather to be 45 degrees, 52 degrees during the wintertime, and it could be 30 degrees, just all over the place. It was one of these temperate zones, could be any temperature. Well, this particular night, after 2 months of being 35, 40, 45, 50, and then 45, 50, 48, 52, that night the temperature dropped down to 19, and they all died of hypothermia, because their thyroid wasn't working. Got all that documented by the U.S. Weather Service, and because I had the Future Farmers of America kid who was doing a high-low thermometer thing, and I got that information there, and then I got it confirmed from the U.S. Weather Service, and published it. Got it published. It was my first published article in Refereed and scientific journals, refereed scientific journals. Is just really quite exciting for a 21-year-old kid to be published already on the first mass out from pollution in America. Well, every year I literally see thousands of people with hypothyroidism of one kind or another, and invariably they're on Synthroid or levothyroxine prescribed by their doctors, which is again a treatment rather than a cure. It can lower the blood markers for hypothyroidism, or raise them to normal, but it's really just treating the symptom. Just like when you take an aspirin to treat arthritis, you're just relieving the symptom of pain. You're not treating the disease. Number one, you got to get rid of the bad stuff that put pressure on the thyroid gland and interfere with its function. You have to get rid of the inflammatory foods, because the thyroid gets inflamed when it doesn't function. And so you have to stay away from fried foods, processed meats with nitrates in it, which goes back to my sheep and my 500 deaths. You have to get rid of the nitrates. That means no deli slices and sandwich meats and processed meats like sausage and bacon and ham.
You know, and I've seen people who have cleaned up their diet and cleaned up their skincare routines, and that's what led them to get their Hashimoto's into remission.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that I always talk to my patients about is whatever their health condition is, but especially if they have any kind of thyroid disease or any kind of hormone imbalance or autoimmune disease, is looking at all the different places you may be exposed to hormone disrupting chemicals and reduce your exposure. It's extremely important, because it's not all doom and gloom. You've been exposed to these things and you'll never get better again. No, that's not true. Your body can eliminate, most of the stuff can be eliminated within 24 hours if we're not exposed to it every day. The problem is, every day we use these products. Every day. All day long, you know? We're putting them on in the morning, we maybe touch up in the middle of the day, and then we use them at night. And then they sit on our skin overnight while we're sleeping. So if we can give our bodies a break and be more aware of these things that we're exposing ourselves to, and just reduce it. You don't have to live in a bubble. You just need to cut back a little bit. Be smart. Use simpler products.
If you want to save your thyroid, if you want to save your health, stop these conventional body care products. I'm talking throw them away. Now that could be overwhelming for people, and that's where I want to come back to reality. And so here's a recommendation for everyone. The lowest hanging fruit that anyone can do today, so easy, is literally to throw away all hand sanitizer. I'm telling you, it's like the worst stuff for you. Conventional hand sanitizer, throw it away. To replace it, super simple. You get a 1 to 2 ounce glass spritzer bottle. You put a few drops of witch hazel in it, a couple drops of aloe, vitamin E, and 7 drops of essential oils per every ounce that the bottle is. So if the bottle is 1 ounce, you put 7 drops of oil. If the bottle is 2 ounce, you do 14 drops, go from there. You mix it up a little bit, and then you fill it up with purified water. You shake it up. That's your hand sanitizer. If you need it, which I'm noticing myself, I wash my hands less than I used to. I'm not obsessed with this, I have to be clean all the time. I used to have hand sanitizer in my car. We had hand sanitizer on our kids' lunch boxes. So the lowest hanging fruit that anyone could do today is to make their own hand sanitizer. And if someone wants to go one step further, is soap. Again, the FDA is banning the triclosan, triclocarbons, and 17 other chemicals from the soap, so let's replace that soap. And it's very simple. You could get a couple ounce glass foam container on Amazon for a couple dollars. About 3/4 of the way, you fill it up with unscented cast steel soap. And you could put a few drops of aloe. Again, you could put a few drops of vitamin E, and then the same ratio, 7 drops of essential oil per ounce of whatever mixture that it is. And that right there is your soap. It's that easy. I mean, you're gonna save a lot of money. You're gonna save your skin microbiome. And believe it or not, it's enjoying the empowerment that you get because you know that you're truly preventing disease because you're not poisoning your body. You're not poisoning your babies and our kids.
In some cases, changing up your personal care routine can seem daunting and overwhelming, but what if making these changes could give you your life back? I'd love to introduce you to Stephanie, who's one of my readers that I had the pleasure of meeting while traveling the country to record The Thyroid Secret. You'll hear more from Stephanie later on in the series. She was able to recover her health following the suggestions she learned from my book, and I was so proud that she implemented these suggestions on her own. Here are some of Stephanie's takeaways.
Yeah, Isabella, when I got her book in around December 2014. So, I mean, I read it cover to cover within the first few days and highlighted it and tabbed it and all this stuff. But her book was really an opening for me about how I was eating, how the food I was eating can affect my thyroid and my whole system, how my medical history, having mono, and just other things I've had in the past could have contributed to where I am now. And just the toxins in our environment. I had no idea that, you know, I was using hand sanitizer every day working in a hospital. There was probably endocrine disruptors. Don't know for sure, but I was a hand sanitizer freak all the time. So it's just the foods I was eating, toxins in my foods. So I've gone organic, and I use organic personal care products. So I think just making those choices overall has helped me, that were introduced in Isabella's book.
So there are 3 keys that I have for finding natural and effective skincare. And stop listening to the people who tell you you have to choose between natural or effective. You can have both. So the first thing is you don't want them to contain the chemicals we've been talking about today. You don't want them to have these harmful ingredients. You can go to certain websites like Environmental Working Group's website or the Campaign for Safe Cosmetics and see what's in your products and what maybe alternatives that you can use instead. So the first thing is clear out the toxins. Get rid of those toxic ingredients. The second thing is to use natural actives. So we want to make sure that we're using the ingredients that really help our skin. We don't want it to just be absent of harmful ingredients. We want it to have natural actives like green tea, CoQ10, vitamin E. These are great things for our skin. Sea buckthorn fruit oil or argan oil. These are great ingredients. So natural actives is the second thing. The third thing is we want our skin to maintain a mild acidity. Our skin does best with a pH around 4.5 to 5.5 as far as ingredients containing that level of pH. It helps support our skin to be healthy, the skin microbiome to flourish, and protect our skin from breakouts and from premature aging. So those are the 3 keys. Have it be clean, have it have natural actives, and have that mild acidity that helps support our skin health. So I hope that helps. I think it's, you know, there are so many things that we can do with our health, and this is just part of it, but it really is an important piece.
Besides cleaning up your personal care routine, you may also want to evaluate your cleaning products and get some organic versions. Speaking of organic, another place to start is with your food. Let's talk about how food pharmacology can help you detox your body. We're going to get into the common foods that could be contributing to your toxic load, as well as the foods that can help you lighten that load.
And then we have heavy metals. Some corn byproducts have been shown to contain mercury.
High fructose corn syrup is one of them, right?
Yes, it absolutely contains mercury. So, you know, and it's not that I think that the quantity of mercury in a little bit of high fructose corn syrup is going to be enough to cause everybody who has a small amount this severe autoimmune disease, but it's one more thing added on to the pile of other things. But then you have rice, right? It's high in cadmium, it's high in arsenic. These are metals that interfere with magnesium, and they interfere with the ability for calcium to work appropriately. So, you know, you need those minerals for a normally functioning thyroid. So we've got heavy metals, we've got molds, we've got mycotoxins, we've got pesticides, we've got gluten, we've got other families of proteins, and that's not all. If we go and we look at even other things that are found within grain, we see high levels of omega-6, which is what I was talking about earlier. So
it's pro-inflammatory.
It's pro-inflammatory.
I would start, and especially people living in this country, to completely eliminate processed foods from the diet. These foods are denatured, they're devoid of any form of nutritional value whatsoever, and for the most part they are genetically engineered. I think this is a crime. This is a huge crime. So I would say, clean up your diet. Do not eat processed foods in any way, shape or form. Eat organic. Enjoy cooking. And start there. The other thing that I would say is don't expose yourself to unnecessary chemicals. When you have an awareness of just how many chemicals we're exposed to just being in your kitchen alone, and the effects that that has on the immune system, having that awareness is really a huge, giant step in the right direction towards regaining your health. Because if you take these chemicals out of your immediate environment, you will be immediately taking a burden off your liver and renal systems. And that, within the context of health in general, is huge. Don't work too hard. We work so hard in this country. I would say balance out your life, your work life and your leisure life, and exercise. And those sound very, very cliched, but I think by just having more of an education of what you are ingesting, more of an education of what you are surrounding yourself by, you can dramatically improve your health.
So, you know, what are some of the sources of exposure of toxins for people in our world?
Everywhere you look now, it's going to be air, water, food, you know, it's in our soil, it's everywhere. So it gets a little disconcerting to people. You know, what do you do? How can you get away from it, right? You can't. I mean, you look at umbilical cord blood studies and breast milk studies and urine studies. I mean, everybody's got this stuff. But you can make some really big decisions on a daily basis that will lower your exposure tremendously. So, number one, you can get an air purifier, right? A decent quality air purifier with something that clears out something called VOCs, volatile organic compounds, very, very important. You can get a water purifier. So, you know, some people like to do the countertop or under the countertop purifiers. Make sure you add back in some minerals. So beyond the air purifiers, you know, there's the water purification. You can do the under the counter reverse osmosis type systems. There are some really nice on counter drip systems above and beyond Brita, you know, some of the Berkey, for example. And those are great about taking, interestingly enough, things like pharmaceutical residues and heavy metals and fluoride out of the water, which is very important.
Removing foods that are toxic is really important. Adding foods and substances that support our natural detoxification pathway is also helpful. I like to recommend beets, green leafy vegetables, sprouts, green juices, turmeric, and hot lemon water.
Chinese clinicians of Chinese medicine, we are trained to not see anything in isolation. So we're trained to not just see the thyroid as an organ that is in charge of metabolizing certain hormones, that are in charge of creating metabolism in the body and metabolic function in the body. And we see it always in relation. We see all organ systems in relation to one another. That's the basic premise of Chinese medicine. It's a medical philosophy. It's rooted in the observation of the environment and how our bodies and how a given body, because each individual is different, is responding to that environment. And the response that we have as individuals to the environment is determined by organ function. And that organ function is interrelated. So no single organ system is functioning in isolation. It's functioning as a whole. So for example, ancient Chinese texts, and I go back 3,000 years, write very, very clearly, there were no labs in those days, that if a patient presents with inflammation in the throat, you immediately you immediately look for a pattern of what we call heat in the intestines, which is basically malabsorption in the intestines. We also look at, it also states that if a person has this enlargement of the throat, in the throat, and it uses very simple terminology, you're going to look at how the liver is functioning in the system, how the liver's regulatory system is working. And so these are two things. When you read Dr. Wentz's book, one of the two main things that you're looking at is how effectively is the liver working as an organ of detoxification, how effectively is the liver working in order to clear hormones, for example, in order to clear toxins, and what is happening at the level of the gut and the digestive system in general.
It's kind of crazy because people will try all of these different things and they say, I've really tried everything and I still don't feel well. My experience has been that a lot of times these people do have a toxic backlog, so they are not processing their toxins correctly, and they end up with a lot of various symptoms like fatigue, like headaches, sometimes even migraines, multiple chemical sensitivities, and they really have a hard time in life. The really beautiful thing here is when you support their liver function with really safe nutrients and supplements, and you have them eat a relatively clean diet, so gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free, for a week or two, they start seeing tremendous changes and huge improvements. About 65% of my clients see a huge turnaround in their health just by following this for 1 to 2 weeks. One woman had multiple chemical sensitivities for almost a decade, so she told me that she couldn't walk past a Yankee Candle store without having an asthma attack. And once she started the liver support protocol that I recommend, she sent me a message. This was a couple of years ago, right around Christmas, and she said, I was able to go Christmas shopping for the first time with my kids at the mall in years because I no longer have multiple chemical sensitivities. I could just walk past any store. I could go inside of a Yankee Candle store and it doesn't bother me. We also saw that her migraines resolved, her body pains resolved, and her thyroid antibodies reduced as well. You can support your own body's detoxification pathways to clear out toxins out of your body naturally. You can do this through sweating, Epsom salt baths, infrared saunas, and liver support supplements like milk thistle, quercetin, methylation support blends, magnesium, N-acetylcysteine, and curcumin. The antioxidant quercetin specifically can mitigate the effects of BPA in your body. Curcumin can help you clear out arsenic, and selenium can help you clear out mercury. Though the process to get rid of toxins fully can take some time depending on your overall toxic burden, you can start feeling better in as little as 2 weeks. Let's check in with Wendy to hear about her progress.
100% people can get better. You have to learn how to detox your body, but first you want to establish what toxins you have in your body by doing testing. I do hair mineral analysis, urine metals challenge tests, and stool tests, and that will give me the complete picture of someone's body burden of toxic metals. You can do it in about 2 years if you're on the correct protocol for you. If you determine what your toxic metals are and you're taking the targeted supplements and doing infrared saunas and things like that that really facilitate metal and chemical removal. So if you're doing a targeted plan, it can take about 2 years to completely detoxify. And even then you still have to maintain it because we're always exposed to toxins on a daily basis. So it's something that you have to learn about and then continue to do for the rest of your life. After spending several years detoxing, finally, I was able to get the results that I sought. I was able to meet my health goals and get my brain functioning back, I really had this mental prowess earlier in my life, and that really began to fade as, after I had my child. I wanted to get a master's degree, and I didn't know how I was going to be able to do that because I had such bad brain fog. But after I detoxed my body and I kind of cleared my brain of a lot of these metals, I was finally able to, go back to school and, pursue my master's and just do all of these things that I really had felt like I wasn't going to be able to accomplish because of how my body and my brain were functioning.
Does it feel good to hear the truth? I'm so grateful to all of my colleagues who volunteer their time to sharing their life's work with you. There's not an expert that held back 1 ounce of wisdom. We all give everything freely and hope that you can have everything that you need to have the health and happiness that you deserve. For all of us, the healing professions are not just our jobs. They're a true calling and really a gift. We're so passionate about helping people heal, and we take this responsibility seriously. We've come together to share the things that we have learned through our collective experiences because we're tired of all the misinformation and toxic therapies and want to set the record straight to give you absolutely everything we could to help you heal. If you would like to get a hold of this information and own the thyroid secret, then consider supporting our mission by clicking the link below to learn more. If you're grateful we were able to get this information to you for free and want to see us continue to do so, then please own this series. This will give you a resource you can rewatch and share with loved ones for many years to come. It'll prove a life-changing resource to you or someone you care about. You're also fully covered by a no questions asked money-back guarantee, so there's no risk to you. You can just try it out and see if you like it. Click the link and learn more. Thank you for your time and for your commitment to yourself and your most important gift, your health. I'll see you in the next episode. How many times have you had an upset stomach, a headache, or joint pain, and just reached into your handbag for some pills instead of thinking about why you have those ailments in the first place? I know we've all done that at some point, but I want to share. There's a secret solution to your thyroid disease that you probably don't know about. It's not a pill, it's not an expensive medical treatment, and it doesn't involve removing your thyroid as conventional medicine would have you believe. It's actually a tool that's in your house right now. To be specific, it's in your kitchen. That's right. One of the best tools we have to reverse the impact of thyroid disease is good nutrition. The top nutrition experts from around the world share the exact foods to eat and which ones to avoid to help the thyroid. You'd be surprised as to which foods are secretly stealing your health. This episode is so important. I don't want you to eat one more thing until you've seen it. As a Hashimoto's patient, I know myself that changing my diet radically changed my health and put me on the road to recovery. I can't wait to share with you the secrets I discovered in this very episode.